Thank you all for being here, and always a pleasure to sit with folks over at Venture Cafe. My name is Jabari Jones. I'm the president of the West Philadelphia Corridor Collaborative. We're the largest coalition of small businesses in West Philly. We are pretty much comprised of all of the hyper-local business associations that represent those corridors. And part of our work over this the pandemic has been figuring out, what an equitable and inclusive recovery looks like for small businesses and even residents and communities that have been devastated by this pandemic. So I'm happy to be the moderator here, and we have some really great panelists, and we'll kind of, I guess, keep it conversational and do a little bit of a fireside chat manner conversation about what the equitable recovery of the city looks like. So I'm going to start it off actually and ask our panelists just to introduce themselves and then the organizations they work with. And so I will turn it over to Ms. Della Clark first, if you want to lead with an intro and let everybody know about some of the work at the Enterprise Center.
Yes, thank you, Jabari. I'm happy to be here this evening. I'm Della Clark. I'm president of the Enterprise Center, and we're located in West Philadelphia at 46 and Market, and we focus primarily on scaling up minority enterprises.
Awesome, thank you. Obediah, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so Obediah Sang, I'm an investor, managing director at Independent Ventures. So I do early stage investing in companies across healthcare. I moved to Philly about 4 months ago, and I was a principal investor for another venture fund in Michigan, and then before that in Minneapolis.
Great, thank you. Garry, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Garry. I'm the entrepreneurial programming manager at Venture Cafe Philadelphia. And I'm just super excited for this conversation because it is not a recovery unless it's an equitable one. And I think we have the best people in the ecosystem to learn from today. So just interested in hearing their thoughts and what they're doing and what they plan for.
Thank you. So the first question, I guess, maybe we should just talk about what some of the problems are. So I guess my first question is, what are some of the challenges that you've seen arise around the pandemic? And then maybe some more specific ones on some of the ones that people may not be thinking about, or things that may not be as mainstream as people would think are. What are some of the unforeseen kind of challenges of the pandemic? Obediah, you want to go first, maybe talking about some of the companies you work with?
Yeah, so from the investment side, obviously, when pandemic happened, a lot of capital dried up for a lot of companies, and therefore, when that happens, those companies that are led by people who are not connected or people who don't have the bigger network actually dries up first. So you find companies raising money not able to close their rounds, and then clients or pipeline of opportunities, including client relationships and revenue, slow down because companies actually not procuring or partnering the way they were procuring before. So you see a host of problems, especially for companies that are led by underserved population.
Thank you for that. Ms. Clark?
Well, I think we have to go back before the pandemic when many minority enterprises were struggling anyway and had limited cash reserve. So when the federal shutdown occurred in March of last year, I don't think anyone predicted that we would be still shut down today. So many of our small businesses were already grappling with cash flow issues before the shutdown and before the pandemic really hit us hard. And so now, they're underfinanced, they're undercapitalized. And as many projects that they were predicting to bring in as a revenue also slowed down. So for instance, if you were in the construction world, that slowed down. If you were in the restaurant food business, that definitely has been severely impacted by the pandemic. So I think there were many industries that have been severely impacted. If you were a vendor or supplier to some of these industries, you've been impacted. So I think it has had what I'd like to say a triple whammy effect on primarily minority enterprises, because not only did we have the pandemic, but we've also had several unrest in our communities that impacted retail, impacted commercial corridors, as you know, Jabari. So that has also been an impact as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Those are all like all great examples of some of the challenges that businesses have faced over this last now coming up on a year. I guess Garry, on from your standpoint, and working at with so many businesses that you guys I think interact on this platform that are speakers that have come in and shared things that are going on in their business. Do you have any, I guess, additional things that you want to add, or some things that we may not be thinking about in terms of, how the pandemic has kind of affected, small Black and brown businesses?
Yeah, for sure. I think we say this all the time, that the inequities were already there and just got amplified and brought to the forefront, unfortunately, due to the pandemic. I've also learned from experienced entrepreneurs who've been there, done that multiple times over, that it's sort of been this way in one form or another throughout history. So for some, this is totally new. For others, this is like, unfortunately, we've always had to struggle for these resources. I think the beauty though of minority business ownership is that we make the most out of so very little. So you just see so much resilience and strength, and so many business owners who are in it for the long run and are going to do what they have to do to continue to support their families and their communities.
I think
Thanks,
there's
Garry.
a positive that could come out of this pandemic, which means that it's causing you to pivot. It's causing you to look at some of the bad habits that you had developed in your business and correct them, because here we are today having a seminar virtually. And I think that the use of technology, embracing those tools, is a good thing that is occurring among our small business. The way you do business is actually brought down the cost of doing business. You don't have to get in your car and drive to see someone. So I think that not only have we been faced with challenges, but there are some positive outcomes, I think, as a result of the pandemic and the change in the way in which we do business. And I think that this is a wonderful time for small businesses to build their network, because people have slowed down and they're working from home, and they're more apt to respond to your email, pick up your phone call. I think participation has increased as a result of the pandemic.
I've also, to your point, Della, I've also seen that a lot of businesses that, maybe before the pandemic that weren't as focused on business education and some of the other tools and connection and networking opportunities have really taken advantage of some of those opportunities now, and have been definitely incentivized to participate a little bit further. When you mentioned pivoting, I think that's a really important thing. Is that we ended up seeing in the pandemic a lot of businesses that had to kind of shift their models, their services, and their products. I guess to the panelists on the call, how have some of you as folks that have been providing resources to small businesses had to kind of pivot in the provision of some of your resources and activities? Can you give us a couple examples?
I'll start out. One of the outcomes of the pandemic is a result of federal stimulus dollars coming into our communities. And what it has unveiled is that many small businesses were not focusing on their financials, and they wasn't doing their financial statements on a regular basis. But in order to participate and receive federal stimulus dollars, you have to have financial data. You got to have information. So what this has done is helped us to increase the financial acumen of our clients, to get them to understand the importance of financial, because you cannot access not only federal stimulus, but other dollars to help finance your future without understanding your numbers. So that has been a good thing that has come out, and we've helped our clients to pivot to focus on their financials more.
That's definitely important. Obadiah, have you seen any of those similar trends in terms of the investment community, or how maybe even some of the companies that you guys have worked with are adapting to this change that could be potentially things that maybe some of the people on this call and other businesses might want to consider as they're growing their business?
Yeah, so I think generally being financial discipline is a good thing. And when you have abundance, then you forget about that. So what we've seen in some of the businesses is we've worked with them to try to make sure that they're being financially disciplined. So for instance, obviously when you raise money as a founder, you all of a sudden you have like $5-10 million. And now you think you've met it, so you live the bigger life. And now we went back and had conversations with them about tightening their belts and kind of being disciplined about their own personal spending. A, and B is the spending of the company. We've also taken initiatives to help them sell more, because when you invest in a company, you sit in their board and you advise them in multiple ways. And we've taken the initiatives of actually being some of their lead salespeople, calling some of our networks to try to get them to sell. So we've done multiple things that we would not have done if it wasn't for the challenges we're facing right now. So our support are higher than it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think too the need for capital is something else that is significantly still something for that businesses are struggling with to fund some of those pivots or pieces of innovation, or where those businesses are needing to change some of those behaviors. I'm curious if any of the panelists have thoughts on small businesses that are right now that are struggling, that might be at any stage that have been affected by this pandemic, that may have not been able to access federal relief programs or have not been able to access relief or grants in general. Are there additional funding sources or additional recommendations that you might have for some of those businesses that could be helpful to them?
Well, it depends on their financial statements. It depends on the data that they have in their business to be able to demonstrate that they've had loss of income or they've been impacted by the pandemic. Just to say that anecdotally and not be able to prove that out in your financial data doesn't work. And that's the problem with many small businesses. They can't substantiate the losses.
Yep. That definitely has been something throughout some of the grant programs. Any other feedback? Any of the other panelists?
So I think a lot of small businesses for the longest time, they've never thought of what are the option Bs. And I think it's a lesson to all of us, if we are business people or starting businesses. When you start a business, you have to think about the scalability of the business and also the exit opportunities. So a lot of small businesses, because they are pop and mom businesses, don't really have the processes and the capabilities to be sustainable and scalable long term. Mm-hmm. So when you set up a business, whether it's a barber shop or a small store, you have to be thinking about all the connectivity and connection that can lead to scalability and exit. And that enables you in times like this to think about, do I need to find a partner to work with? Do I need to, shut one store and open another store in somewhere else? But if you don't have those processes and thinking in your mind and plans, then you're not able to do these things. So as we move forward, And as we start business, even if it's a barbershop, let's think about the scalability of the business and the adaptability of the business to any change that might happen. I think we have to, that has forced us to.
I'd like to add some comments to that. When businesses are in the ideation stage, right, the decisions they make at that time is based on the amount of capital that they have. And so when you look at minority enterprises, when they start out, there's just not that family wealth to be able to aggregate, you know, anywhere from $75,000 to $250,000 to go through proof of concept, to go through the period of endurance. And so when you're able to go through that stage with very little debt, then you're positioned for angel investors, equity, and you can move all the way up to the capital stack that position you for scale. But when you're starting out in that early stage and you don't have access to that, and you're starting out with credit cards, you're starting out with loans, you really are not positioned for a scalable business to exit. So I think we need to look at as we talk about the ecosystem, the environment, not only in Philadelphia, but in America, it is unjust in terms of go all the way back to wealth creation, and minority families do not have that wealth to be able to make the right decisions in that early ideation stage to put that business on a track for exit strategy 5 years from there. It just doesn't happen. And that's what we need to change.
Mm-hmm.
So right, I agree with, go ahead.
No, so go ahead.
So I think, and that's the work that about 5 years, maybe 4 years ago, I was in Las Vegas with a number of founders and investors that are minorities. And if you look across Silicon Valley, even some of the New York startups, a lot of them are, a large number of them are founded by or co-founded by Black and brown people. And the discussion was the same discussion. A lot of them don't make it to a seed round because they don't have the 50,000 or the 250,000 funding. And there were a number of investors that were also Black and brown, and we continue discussing about, is there a way to raise a round or raise a fund that will invest in seed and early stage for Black founders? And that discussion led to a number of other things and other discussions. And right now we have a fund that I'm also advising. We've raised about, I don't want to say they've raised around $30 million. They'll close a $50 million round. And the intention is to invest in Black and brown businesses. And I say that's because it's a passion of mine. I'm a first generation immigrant. I haven't been in this country for a long time. And opportunities are not even.
Nope.
And I've met so many intelligent people who never got opportunities. And I think it's important to remember that we have to be intentional in how we connect with people, how we represent ourselves, and how we put the effort. Because the reality is the opportunities are not even. And that's the world we live in. So what can we do given what we have? What can we do to progress? And so I'm proud of a lot of founders that have gone ahead and built their business, even with all the challenges they face. But if you want to talk with them, they'll tell you the work they put to do that. So there's a lot of things we have to do ourselves. We have to continue participating in political front. We also have to continue supporting our families. and educating each other about things that are available, things that are not available, polishing our own self in order to advance, because the environment is not, and it's not about black, white, whatever.
Right.
It's just, if you don't have, then you're not connected with people that have. So the unfortunate part is the brown and black people are, majority of people don't have. But even the white people don't get connected to the white people who don't have. So it's unfair environment that we are in, but we cannot sit and wait. We just have to keep pushing.
I think you make a really great point too on the status of how it has been unequal and how the lack of resources that typically are Black and brown neighborhoods affect being able to start up and affect being able to have access to information and access to certain tools and access to just basic business knowledge that helps them build the right business foundations. What do you think the role of government, now looking at there have been a lot of initiatives, there have been great conversations throughout the last couple of months, particularly when it comes to governments and private corporations and others figuring out, how they can help predominantly historically disadvantaged Black and brown small businesses. So what I would love to hear from any of the panelists, what do you think the role of government in the greater Philadelphia area, and you can choose any level of government that you'd want to focus on, but what are the ways the government can kind of help bridge that gap and get rid of some of those disparities?
Well, I'll use the PPP as an example. While that encompasses federal decisions, because it was passed by, the president, by Congress, both House and Senate, and then the president, but the labor, the work has to be local. And so when you look at the first round of PPP, all the data showed that very few minorities, Black and brown businesses, participated or received any of the first round of PPP. And that was because none of us at a local level grabbed hold of it and really worked it. And so in this round 2 here, the Enterprise Center has stepped up, and we're really pushing to make sure that the number of Black and brown receive that. And so I think what we have to understand is that when you speak of public dollars and public policy, that many times is done at a high level, whether it be at the federal, state, or local level. It requires local leadership to make sure that the dollar flow through our communities. And oftentimes we sit on the sideline and don't get involved to make sure that those dollars flow through our community. And PPP is a good example of that.
It was absolutely. And I think that, even to your point, the differences of how many African-American businesses were able to access that program once CDFIs were allowed to participate, the numbers are just so glaring, making it glaringly obvious of making sure that the smaller and sometimes local organizations that do the on-the-ground work with Black and brown businesses and with those populations are involved in helping disperse some of those funds.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Obediah, did you have a comment as well? Is there anything any recommendation you'd have for government that might, even from an investment standpoint, that might make it easier for some of these funds that might be looking to invest in Black and brown companies, or even from a private sector? Have you seen any interesting trends or any recommendations that you would offer that would kind of help that outcome?
So I will say, I'll add. So I think we have to continue educating our community, because the reason why. So the first step of getting something is we have to show up, whether it's to vote or apply for the PPP. So I think, and even get the COVID vaccine or any of that. We have to continue educating our communities. We have to continue educating the people that are around us about the opportunities that are available there. Because if we don't, then most of our communities are not going to know. So we just have to educate the community.
Garry, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think piggybacks quite nicely off of what Obadiah just said. I think people have more power than they believe they do. And it's, it's up to government to make sure that we are more inclusive around who gets to invest in the success of small businesses and technology startups. And I think the beauty of what we've seen over the past several years is, people are leveraging these crowdfunding platforms where the community can be galvanized around the story of that business, and individuals in your community can support you, and at this point actually own a piece of equity, which means that they are invested in your long-term success. So, on the government level, it's up to them to make sure that we are more inclusive around who gets to invest and how much they get to invest, because you can only invest a certain amount, and to be an accredited investor, there are all these different rules and things. But there's truly a lot of power when communities come together and are able to rally around these businesses. And some of the exciting stuff we saw last year was, first Black woman to raise over $1 million in it was like I forget what it's called. It's like digital currency. She did digital currency fundraising.
Cryptocurrency.
Yeah. And then there's another Black man who has a trucking startup who raised over $1 million through equity crowdfunding. So the tools are out there. Again, it's about educating the community that they're there, about how to benefit from them, and to make sure that we are included, because it is, again, about equity in this ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that statement about coalitions is really important too. And I would pose to my next question to the panelists is, are there any ways that, throughout this pandemic, that you've collaborated with other partners or stakeholders that you may traditionally not have or have not necessarily thought of? I always think that Venture Cafe is a great example of this in the virtual format of being able to convene, stakeholders and conversations like these. And they've been able to do a really great job of bringing in people that may not necessarily fit the technologist background per se, but have some really great conversations about all sorts of topics that are of public interest. So I'm curious to the other resource providers on here. Have you collaborated with anyone recently that, or any collaborations or partnerships that have been able to do some great things for small businesses, or have you seen any that have been really inspiring over this period?
Well, a group of us are in major cities, have come together on PPP and have shared best practice and working collectively to make sure that minorities across America are benefiting from PPP. Because when you look not only in Philadelphia, but in other major cities, we've had a number of small business closures. And the minority closures is far greater than the non-minority. So we wanted to make sure this time that we didn't sit on the sideline as local leaders in our respective city and push PPP. So there has been a collaborative approach to that, not only locally, because locally we work with our chambers and other service providers, but both nationally, we work with other cities as well. And we've been effective with that.
Awesome. Obadiah, any partnerships or any models?
I can't remember any.
None? Okay. Nothing inspiring. How about you, Garry? Any inspiring things you've seen lately of any companies moving together that have been doing this well?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. We appreciate all the love and support of the Venture Cafe team and our platform. But yeah, one of the beauties of the pandemic is that our global network of ecosystems are so much more connected, and it's easier to collaborate. So we're also learning from one another, and learning that, like, we're all learning together, figuring it out as we go, sharing best practices. No ecosystem has it all figured out, but just to be able to collaborate with ecosystems as far as, not just Venture Cafe in Miami, but Venture Cafe in Tokyo, right? And connecting our innovators with their innovators, who are learning from one another, and then also, forming relationships and expanding their worldview. And learning best practices. So I think that is a great thing that's come out of all of this, and hopefully that part continues and all the horrible parts of the pandemic end. But that has been a plus for sure.
I think one of the best examples that I liked that was over the summer was the CDFI Coalition program, and I know that the Enterprise Center was a member of that group that came together to administer some state grants,
Right.
and that program did a really great job of supporting a lot of businesses. But one of the things that I really liked about it was that it took into consideration some of the feedback that Black and Brown and small companies had about grant programs where it's a one and done, it's a first time first serve, and you're able to they develop different rounds that businesses could apply. So if you found out round one that you didn't have all of the documents that you needed to apply, you still had some time to gather those things, and they provided some resources to be able to help where to find those things, and then you could apply again for round two or round three, so that there wasn't as huge of a population that would be left out of that program. And that is not traditional thinking, and those aren't the things that you typically get when programs go through places that they normally go to. When you look at the way the government typically disperses dollars, they're not thinking about that because they don't necessarily have those same problems, and they don't work with the smaller Black and Brown businesses that have those problems. And so that was always one of my favorite examples of what the CDFIs were able to put together. And then, the other idea of just us as a corridor association, and being able to bring together these business associations from different areas of West Philly to still be able to collaborate and joint advocate for one another is really large. So my next question kind of relates a little bit in terms of advocacy. As we see the pandemic rolling around, we know that equitable and equitable recovery and inclusion is going to be something that's really huge. It's something that's definitely want to be needed, because we want to make sure that no neighborhood or no segment of the population gets left behind from that. What are some of the things that small businesses, business service providers, and even chambers of commerce might want to advocate for, have in their advocacy arsenal, the things that they're thinking about when they advocate before government? So what are some of those things that you think that businesses need that we might be able to push government to be able to do, or even a private sector to do?
I think the supply chain and opening up doors for local procurement, localism is so important. Purchasing has become now so global because of the internet. And rather than thinking, how do we spend our dollars local with the local economy, and particularly identifying minority vendors, I think that we need three things joined at the hip that works concurrently: would be contracts, capital, and helping our clients build out their capacity that they need to grow and scale up, so that they can go to independent ventures and get some of that $10 million so that they can grow, right?
Yep.
Yes, yes, we need to become his farm team, to grow his
Exactly.
so they can get his Series B, C, and D money,
Yep. We definitely have a lot to talk about, Obediah.
That's right. So we need to help them get to scale so that they can get his VC dollars, right? And you can't grow to scale without capital, contracts, and having capacity, because VCs do not want to put money in you if you don't have a good, solid team.
That's right. Yeah, that's really great. Garry, any other thoughts on how government might be able, or what are some of the things that we can advocate for to help push that?
No, I love what Della just said. Only thing I would add is, I think there are plenty of sort of tax breaks and benefits that our communities are not aware of. And, government has, worked to get those set up, but I don't know that they always truly want to make sure that everyone is aware of the benefits they could be receiving. So I think there's a whole lot of work to be done there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So for me, I think you cannot address recovery until and unless you address COVID. So I think the government can do a lot to make sure that the vaccine rollout is equitable and in fact covers a lot more within the minority communities, because those are the communities that are impacted the most.
Yeah.
I think you cannot recover unless you address the vaccine and COVID. And if you look at the minority businesses, majority of their customers are minority population. So if they cannot open or they cannot have the customers, then they might not be able to do the things they need to do to actually recover. So we have to address the COVID crisis in our communities.
Yep, that's a big one. I mean, I think that we have to get. I always say when we've been doing some advocacy on some of the stimulus programs, it's so important that the stimulus is temporary money, is band-aid money, right? At the end of the day, businesses need to get back to being able to generate revenue and generate income. And until you get, especially some of those smaller companies, the ability to get back out there, get their doors open, get to the level of capacity that they can generate income and generate revenue, that you can't have those conversations about how to recover. So yeah, those are all really great points. I think at this time, we want to open it up in case anybody in the audience has any questions. I also saw that Eamon Gallagher posted a couple of really great links into the chat. So everybody make sure you take a look at that. Any questions from the audience at this time, or anything anyone wants to ask? You can just unmute yourself and ask your question. Anyone? No? No? Cool. Okay, well, I'll ask another question. I'll ask this question a little bit in terms of, we talked a little bit about technical assistance and some of the support that businesses kind of need. Other than, I know we've talked a lot about, on top of the managing your finances and being a financially sound business being very important, but what's some of the other technical assistance that you kind of have seen that businesses need that's kind of arisen from problems from the pandemic?
I personally no longer like the word technical assistance. I think we should move toward the word business support services, because technical assistance is too generic. And what we need to hone in on is, how do we get under the hood of these businesses and really help resolve the problems and challenges? So again, they can be positioned from the ideation stage to the growth stage to the scale up, all the way to exit. And until we get under the hood and repair some of those challenges, they can't do that. And it's not just about capital. It is about who's helping them make decisions, helping them put together kind of a de facto board that can, board of advisors. And we ourselves have to become better intermediaries in our respective community and as we work with the businesses. So the Enterprise Center is moving away from a generic term, technical assistance, to business advisory support services, and really taking advantage of this virtual environment where we have so many homebody experts who are at home because who are working for private sector, who normally would be traveling, normally would be busy. We're taking advantage of that and getting our clients one-on-one help with some of them, and including with our staff. So I think this is a wonderful environment that we're in as homebody, to be able to take advantage of that and do more one-on-one. One of the things that I have learned too is that when you were speaking about public sector and advocacy and dollars, it seemed that when funders look at distressed communities and look at Black and brown businesses, they always want to talk about it from a standpoint of a program. Whereas in non-minority communities, it's about investment capital. So I'm interested less in programs and getting our businesses more live opportunities and helping them build their networks, and we ourselves at the Enterprise Center being better intermediaries for them, because we've learned capital flows where it knows.
That's a really good point. Anyone else with any feedback?
I think I'll agree. I think every business needs an advisor, and a really good one, because advisors are not just there to advise you, they're there to make phone calls if you need to call somebody, connect you with people, and all that. Every business needs an advisor. So if you don't have an advisor, go find one.
Yeah.
And I would just add that I think we we've been talking about for-profit businesses for the most part, but I think, you know, the nonprofits need the same help, and there's also that relief funding out there for them. So making sure they're aware of the funding and they have the same support to those business support services from awesome local organizations.
Very good, very good. All right, so our last question before closing out here is a final pearl of wisdom. What are you looking forward to in terms of the recovery of small businesses? Are there anything that any discussions you've had, any new resources or new products or services that you've developed that you're excited about that you want to share at this point?
I'm looking for some of the Biden's Build Back Better.
I think everybody's waiting for that bill to pass.
I'm looking for some of those dollars so we can rebuild some of our commercial corridors and rebuild some of our neighborhoods and rebuild our Black and brown business. So we need to make sure that some of those federal dollars flow through our distressed communities, because we have to serve, as I said, the intermediaries to make sure this capital flows there. So I'm looking for the Build Back Better dollars.
Della, can I ask you, what do you think about that term, that phrase, Build Back Better? Does that resonate or not?
It resonates with me, and I'm looking at that 1.9 trillion and seeing if there's any Build Back Better dollars in there. I can put Philadelphia's name on it, okay? That's what we have to do. We cannot sit on the sideline, right? Because that money is going to go to cities that are organized, neighborhoods that are organized, and those who come with a plan. So we need to get a plan together so that we can get some of that 1.9 trillion.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So it's kind of like the Amazon project, right? Where we all came together for Amazon. We're all going to have to figure out how to come together for the infrastructure that Philly needs. Interesting.
I bet you cities and communities are already lining up with their Build Back Better plans to get some of this 1.9 trillion, and they're following this legislation very closely. Mm-hmm. So we need to do the same here in Philadelphia.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. You had another question? Oh, okay. Any other feedback from any of the other panelists that want to talk about anything you're looking forward to, any new services or products or programs? Yeah.
Actually, I have a question for it's Obediah. Obediah, how have you found being in Philly? You said you've been here 4 months. How's the reception been to you?
I haven't left my so I live in Center City, and it's been crazy. Yeah. I've been in my apartment for 4 months now.
Well, welcome. I'll take a walk with you. I live near you. We'll take a walk when we can. Okay.
I'll take that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm gonna bring you some clients.
Good.
Absolutely. Yeah, Obadiah, we got a lot to talk about. Absolutely.
Yeah, bring you some clients. Okay.
I'll take it.
Okay. Okay.
There we go.
All right.
Okay. So there are no other questions. I think I'm gonna give this back over to actually I'll give it to Garry if he has some closeout remarks, and also maybe if Tracy's on, for people that might be new to Venture Cafe, maybe you guys can give a little bit more of a spiel about the program here.
Much appreciated, Jabari.
Thanks, Jabari. Garry, do you want to give some closing thoughts?
No, I was just gonna ask if anyone had any final questions. We do have, several minutes left here. But yeah, Tracy, I mean, you are our VP of Ecosystem Development. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on what you heard and how you see our work fitting in with it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for an amazing session and some really great insights. I would say that, we pride ourselves on trying to be ecosystem builders. And what that means is really making sure that we're collaborating. And I think that, Ellen brought up the Amazon bid. I think that was a really great example of Philadelphia all coming together to row in one direction. And we need to do that again. And we need to, consistently think of all of our anchors and making sure that we're tapping on the anchors and the institutions to make sure that we are rowing together. I hate more than anything, lots of people doing the same thing. And only therefore being able to touch the surface because we're not building on the great work that other partners are doing. And so there's great people in Philadelphia and great collaborators. And I think we need to just make sure that we are coming together from an ecosystem standpoint to get the dollars that Della was talking about. And I think you're right. I mean, other cities are lining up right now to figure out how to put a plan together. And as a city, we need to be doing that as well.
Thank you, Tracy.
Very well said.
Yep. Yeah, and hopefully, everyone continues to have these conversations in their own organizations. Our theme of this month is equitable recovery, but this is a long-term recovery. So we should be talking about this every single week, every single month, and for the years to come. So we appreciate all of you for contributing to the discussion, for all the great work you're currently doing in the ecosystem, for the work that will be done in the long term. And we are going to sort of transition to our next panel discussion, Blacks in Hospitality. So thank you, Obediah. Thank you, Della. Thank you, Jabari. Thanks, Tracy.
Can I ask one question of Della based on what Tracy just said?
Mhm.
So Tracy, you mentioned ecosystem development, and Della, you talked about enough with the programs for Black and Brown founders and more, where's the investment? Do you hear ecosystem development and think another program, or do you see that as a different thing or a useful thing or a valuable thing?
Well, everyone wants to look at our ecosystem. I quite frankly don't think our ecosystem is broken. I think our ecosystem is under-resourced. It is not sufficiently funded, okay? And our ecosystem is a result of how funds are distributed in Philadelphia by the funders. And so what it does is Philadelphia does not collaborate as much as it should, because when RFPs and funding opportunities are put out, they cause you to compete rather than collaborate. And funders drive the ecosystem. They don't know it, but they do with their funds. And when you take an approach of put out a little bit of money and have people compete for it, doesn't cause you to want to work with anyone. And I think that's one of the challenges with our ecosystem in Philadelphia. It is not broken, it's just underfunded.
Yep.
Funders need to change how they fund it.
Yeah, Della, I always say that we have more engine than we have fuel in the work that Ben Franklin does, but more generally. 2 years ago, Pitch Book, which looks at early stage investing, said who would win the venture capital Super Bowl, Boston or Philadelphia? And in Philadelphia, we had invested in 68 companies. In Boston, only 59 companies. But in Boston, they had 10 times the capital in those companies. We're hungry. And that's writ large. That's not even when we're talking about Black and Brown founders or when we're talking about lifestyle businesses. That's in the areas that are supposedly sexy enough to get capital. So I think we do. It's how do you take the kind of energy the Amazon proposal got and come together in something, not to map it again, but to mine it.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
Final questions? If not, I'm going to ask Natalie to transition us to